Yes, let's start.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining IDWF in our event, Climate Change is a Labor Issue, Domestic Workers Demanding Justice. Before we start, a reminder that today we have interpretation in multiple languages, so please follow the instructions on the screen to find the language that you require. We will have a section of questions and answers at the end, so feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. We always love reading your hellos, your holas, and please put some questions there. We will make sure to address those questions either today, if we have the time, or through a follow-up report. So climate change does not only affect biodiversity loss, deforestation, and land use, but also entirely the labor market and workers' rights, acting as an exacerbator of existing precarities and endangering domestic workers by exposing them to health risks. Many domestic workers used to be the lands and farmers and suffer the impacts of the contamination of our lands, of our waters, of our rivers, weakening the ecosystems, unable to reduce virus emergencies. Many domestic workers coming from rural backgrounds, coming from the agrarian lands, they are exposed in multiple ways. They are living in crowded, unsanitary conditions, using cleaning products in the houses with the strong chemicals that pollute not only the environment, but also have an impact in their health, and handling waste within households. Today, we want to discuss how is that the environmental justice is a labor issue, and what kind of approaches have domestic workers in the global movement have taken to elaborate the links between climate change and other sectors, such as workers' rights. This is a matter that has been discussed in the last IDWF Congress in 2018 through a resolution that it was coming from the Americas. And when I say Americas, I want to say it's coming from Latin America, from North America, and from the Caribbean. The discussion was very lengthy and very rich, bringing different elements and layers that pose environmental justice as an allied, as an issue that is also about workers' rights. Today, we have one of the leaders that has been pushing for this resolution in the Americas and was brought to the Cape Town Congress, and she is Ruth Diaz, and she's here today. So for interpreters, I'm going to switch to Spanish in this moment to introduce Ruth. Ruth, muy buenos días, muy bienvenida.
Ruth, good morning, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Ruth was born in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, and she was born in 1978. She is a mother of 3, and she is currently the president of the National Federation of Working Women and of the Cooperative of Savings Credits and Multiple Services of the National Federation of Working Women. She is also an executive director of the Specialized Training Center for Domestic Services, and it provides training services to the domestic sector as a whole. Ruth has multiple degrees, and perhaps one of them is business administration, public administration, and she has a postgraduate degree in hotel administration. She also has a degree in social security and several diplomas of regional political studies. She also has a diploma that links social security with a gender perspective, occupational risks, and a gender perspective. She also knows about law, and she integrates all these perspectives in the fight for domestic workers. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite Ruth for her to tell us in which way this initiative was born, this resolution of the IDWF, and in which way this evolved as the discussions took place with other leaders from other parts of the world during our Congress. Ruth, welcome, and you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. And I would like to thank the entire team, Rola, Lila, sharing this this space with all these women is very enriching because it's so important to have and to analyze the the status of women thing. I would like to thank the UN Commission on the status of women as well. This, climate change is almost never addressed, and particularly the impact on labor rights. And I remember when in 2017 we were called to coordinate our Congress in Cape Town in 2018, which was going to be held in 2018. And all the regional offices were mobilized to express their positions. And when we received the email for us to adopt or to propose measures or resolutions, we expressed that climate change or the environmental issue was important from the labor perspective as well. And this took place when I was being a consultant in the Ministry of Environment of the Dominican Republic. And that's how the debate was born, because this is a very technical issue that needs to be approached from many perspectives, not just the climate perspective. And that's why we started a debate with the Minister of the Environment, the Ministry of Women, and a number of institutions, public institutions, to conduct our advocacy actions. And that's how this resolution was born. Don't attack me, that is called in Spanish, no me agredas. And we had the opportunity to make it visible in our Congress in Cape Town in 2018. I very well remember that the Americas were able to be coordinated to be able to express this. And I need to admit that the discussion at some point was a bit unknown. And there were many, many concerns. But then something marvelous took place, something wonderful. And that's when we started to speak and to motivate the others, and how climate change motivates displacements, particularly farmers, indigenous women, because land stops producing or making produce, and how this affects the economy in care issues. Because when there's a phenomenon or a catastrophe and there's water scarcity, there's no electricity, there's no food, how this affects those women who remain in the households, whether they are doing paid work or no, or not, and how their physical condition also worsens. And that's how we started to see a scenario where we see we address the culture of do not attack, do not harm, how we can put Mother Nature, Mother Earth at the center. So human beings have appropriated the Mother Earth, and they have tried to harm it. And they could also become, human beings could also become the executors of violence against women. And so all this economic system that was against women. And that's why we started talking about do not attack. And particularly regarding domestic workers, we saw how we could preserve health and protect the health of recyclers or of women domestic workers, and what to do. And the topic was ecological households. That is to say, all that solid waste could be productive. And precisely yesterday, we concluded an eco exhibit where colleagues from a sector in which Juana, which is a very contaminated sector, where we have the three headquarters of the unions of our country, they converged with the domestic workers leaders, and after having several workshops on feminism and arts and crafts, they put forward, or they told us what they were able to sell to the public. And that's my logic, right? How through as household I can raise awareness to my employer, and I can propose measures so as not to contaminate the environment, how we can recycle, how we can use the 3 Rs, and how we can use better products, chemical products, I mean, for cleaning that are not so invasive. And this, of course, has an impact on the labor risks and the protection of health, which leads us back to Convention 189 and the ratifications as well. And for those that were already ratified, we need to demand their enforcement. And so when we see this from the labor perspective and from the do not attack perspective, we need to mention C-190. C-190 has to do with violence. When climate change affects everybody in a biological way, how does it affect women? It affects everybody, but how does it affect the body of women? And we can also talk about involuntary abortions or miscarriages, because the products that we're using for farming also affect women's bodies directly. We're talking about labor violence, biological violence, economic violence, because when a woman decides to go to a different city or a different area, it's not because she chooses to do so, it's because she needs to survive. And therefore, she finds a completely unknown environment, a completely different environment with a different culture. Imagine the indigenous peoples. Their identity as human beings changes completely when they have to move somewhere else. And therefore, they find physical, verbal attack and harassment. And therefore, seeing climate change, seeing the evolution of the environment, and transfer that in a cross-cutting way to a gender perspective and to a labor perspective, this allows us to make visible the fact that the space has to do, everything has to do with domestic work, neoliberal issues, capitalistic issues, where decisions are made in the governments not to preserve what we have, but to win the free trade agreements that are very invasive in that regard and very conservative also, to be able to move forward with the issue of labor. Big companies are created no matter how costly that is, no matter what the cost for us would be. So these are all issues that from the IDWF perspective, they mean that we were able to take a significant step with this resolution, because we were able to put forward on the table very sensitive issues. And now we all understand that all these have to be accompanied with rights, with human rights and with labor rights. There's another convention that I have to mention, that is Convention 156, regarding conciliation between labor and or the work-life balance of women. Many times we're exposed to risks during our work, and sometimes we cannot have an impact in our work. And that's why we want to raise awareness among the labor world and among specifically among the decision makers and employers, so that they can be aware that the smallest core that doesn't want to recognize that it's the most productive one. It's the care core. And from that core, everything else stems, because that is where stability is proposed and created. That's how we can motivate and mobilize to towards having healthy and ecological households that provide a safe and secure environment for those who work there. And therefore, they would create friendly communities regarding the environment, and therefore a much more friendly environment where we can live. We want to promote policies and to have an impact on decision makers so that they can promote public policies. And that's how our resolution came to be, because as the IDWF, with this resolution, we can have an impact on climate change and solid waste, so that we can contribute our grain of salt. We can revisit these issues, and we can not just remain with the discourse. We can take action in the enforcement of laws that accompany this. So it's not just a decision-making process. We need to mobilize, and we need to have training with all these things that we are doing. The ecological exhibit here in the Dominican Republic is a reality. There's an ecofeminist movement, and it's based on this brochure, the Do Not Attack Action. I would like to thank the IDWF for this space, which is worldwide, and which allowed Latin America to have an impact to conduct advocacy in this. And together we can continue making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, for providing us with such detailed framework where you tell us where it was born, but also how to enrich the discussion, the analysis that is so elaborated, so sophisticated. I remember back in Cape Town, where there were domestic workers and leaders from all over the world participating as such. The environment is a consequence of the degradation of the environment itself, that capitalism, hunger and greediness that is affecting us all. But it's important to see how domestic workers could actually translate this into concrete actions written within our resolution. With that framework then, and that historic overview of this resolution, I'd like to welcome the next panelists to continue enriching the debate, and they can share how they are seeing this intersection, this linkage between life reality of domestic workers and the intersection of environmental justice. With that, let me just submit one question for all the panelists. Being a leader, domestic worker from around the world, what do you think is that unique approach that you see in the linkage between your reality and environmental justice? For that, we'll welcome Lilian de Leon, who is a Mayan Achi woman. She's 27 years of age, part of the Union of Similar and Self-Employed Domestic Workers, CITRADOMSA, in Guatemala. She's also an activist in labor rights and prevention of violence. She's also focused on preventing pregnancies and forced marriages and unions in girls and teenagers. And she's also a student of legal and social sciences. She has participated as a panelist in numerous national and international meetings on domestic work, with a special focus on issues related to indigenous women. With that then, Lilian, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you so much, Adriana. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone around the world. Thank you, Adriana, for that introduction. I represent the domestic workers unions in Guatemala, and we are a trade union made up of different women, mestizas, Mayan, different ethnic backgrounds are gathered in the union. We have internal and external migrant domestic workers from many countries in Central America. So we are in the fight and follow-up of these issues, not just for mestizas or indigenous women, but at an international level, the fight that we carry out on domestic work and focusing on the environmental issue. Let me share with you that in Guatemala, according to the National Survey on Statistics, there's 320,000 domestic workers, 92% of which are women and 8% are men. So you can see the significant inequality in treatment and labor rights that they can exercise. Access to services and social benefits is also characterized by inequality. Mayan women work more than 36.9 hours in average, and we invest 32.8 hours in unpaid tasks. The global burden is 17.4 more than men. And that means that indigenous women have a very high labor burden, but we carry this burden of being mothers, daughters, and having to do all the chores at home in our households. This affects us seriously because this pandemic situation has brought about negative effects on us, indigenous women, particularly our return to our communities, to our origin. And this means that we are affected in a direct manner because of the lack of access to economic resources, as well as the high index of inequality that we live in. This pandemic taught us, indigenous women, that we are also in an abandonment situation. We, indigenous women, return to our households without being paid. Women in communities look for more benefits. However, many of them are discriminated. They're not hired. They're victims of abuse and violence. And this affects them physically, but also psychologically. We've seen that indigenous women currently are discriminated from a double angle. We are victims of cases of harassments and violence. And some of them are asking us, well, what are we doing? How are we facing these challenges? What do we do from our union to represent them and to help them exercise these rights that were violated? I think the state should guarantee the exercise of these rights. However, many of them were violated, leaving these women without protection. And this is also teaching us that there are no statistics on this situation, there's no follow-up on them. However, we've seen that from our everyday activities and actions as activists, we've positioned domestic workers and access to water, despite the fact that they are discriminated and prosecuted when they defend the water and their lands. We've seen how this criminalization is starting to take place, and we follow up reinforcing the fight, supporting these women, not just in their labor rights and domestic work, but also with different topics. We support them and we work in communities where there has been a high demand for this type of services. In Guatemala, it's very sad to see how advocates of labor rights, human rights, and defense of their land have been prosecuted. They've been killed as well when defending their territories. And this shows us that women have to be strong and continue with follow-up activities and gather amongst ourselves, not just amongst domestic women, but young women, Mayan women, Incas women. We are now living under this situation in Guatemala, which has been very sad quite severe, and we believe that the environmental issue has helped us position domestic workers, because we are victims of violence and we have very little natural resources. We defend certain regions, not just our lands, but also defend our labor rights, which are quite unfair, inhumane. We work very long and extenuating hours. We work double shifts sometimes when we care for the elderly and for children. However, we would like to reinforce that there's no legislation protecting us. It is important to continue our fight, that the initiative 4191 that gives light to C189 can be ratified in Guatemala, and this will help us tremendously to position ourselves as working women, but also defending labor rights of women at large. This will help us prevent violence, not just at the region or municipal level, but also at the territory level, where our comrades are defending their lands, so that the ministries, and particularly the Ministry of Labor, can take this situation into account. We are undergoing a very significant migration of our youth. Our youth is migrating, women, children, women who were single moms and had to migrate to other countries due to the lifestyles they were carrying out here. They cannot support themselves. And in many occasions, this makes them become sick or ill, but also have psychological issues. We've heard this in different meetings, in different gatherings that we've organized at the union. We've seen that the situation, the labor situation in which they are, and the massive termination of different contracts and different labor activities have translated into sicknesses, diseases, and some of them have even thought of committing suicide. This is something we need to touch upon, because domestic workers are victims of situations that can take us to psychological issues and suicide as well, due to the different situations that they live in their own households, but also in their place of work. This pandemic has taught us that we have to be united and strong. It also taught us that we have to request and demand before the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Health, and different ministries, where we can generate advocacy, because we need to make sure that the state guarantees these rights. We've also learned that social security is very important for us. Many women are in need of social protection, and this is a sector that has been forgotten. They always tell us that they will support us in different fairs or events carried out by different actions. However, this is not taken into consideration. These are issues that are not visible. And as young indigenous women, we're trying to position this situation to make it more evident. Thank you for this time.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much, Lilian, for sharing with us all these unique perspectives around what it means to be a domestic worker and an indigenous domestic worker, and in the multiple ways that how environmental and climate crisis is affecting you as a woman and as a domestic workers, how it affects emotionally, how it affects physically, how it affects socially, but also, as you said, all the teachings and all the actions that you are doing to fight back, to resist, and to inspire to the rest of us. Thank you so much, Lilian, again. So Now I would like to introduce to our next speaker, who is Aissata Sadjo, who will discuss environmental disaster, floods, and hitting domestic workers' livelihoods and lives. Aissata Sadjo is a widow, mother of 3 children, and a domestic worker for 30 years already. She is the General Secretary of Sintorba, supporting domestic workers' advocacy and work in Nigeria. Aissata, please come, the floor is yours, sister. Aissata, are you there? We can see you frozen. And I see that you are muted. I don't know if you can hear us. Perhaps you need to unmute the microphone. Okay. While we wait for Aissata, I don't know if somebody can support her for unmuting the microphone. Aissata, there you go. Okay. Perhaps we can go to the next speaker until we give some time to Aissata to figure out what's happening with her audio. So we are going to go to our next speaker. Unfortunately, we couldn't reach out to our next speaker, who is in India. But luckily, we have somebody that can speak on behalf of herself. We have Sister Lima from India. Sister Lima is going to speak on behalf of Janki Devi. Go ahead, Sister Lima.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Sister Lima, working with the domestic workers for more than 15 years in India. I am part of NDWF, coordinating the programs, and also I am a joint secretary of NDWF. And Janki has gone out of her house. I think in the morning itself, she has not reached back. So when I contacted her daughter, she apologized and sorry for this disturbance. Okay, then I will continue with introducing Janki Devi, and she was a domestic worker for 10 years and in the union for 8 years. She is currently staying in a place called Manikati in the state of Bihar, India, and had to migrate from her district Darbhanga. The question is that you told us that you had to migrate from Darbhanga to Manigachi in Bihar. What were the reasons that made you to move, and what do you think were the factors behind it? And Janki's response was that the entire family moved because of the recurrent floods in Darbhanga that brought onset climate change. And Darbhanga, this is from my point I am telling, Darbhanga is belongs North Bihar districts. Usually every year there is flood because of flow of 2-3 rivers there, Kosi, Ganga. So every time people had to migrate. So automatically they migrate to a better and little higher places where they can live, and they found domestic work. Recurring floods meant that agricultural produce was less, so overall food was scarce. It also meant that children could not effectively go to school as they could access it due to the stagnant flood, as they could not access it due to the stagnant flood. It meant that the stagnant water plus the water that overflowed mixed with the sewage and became breeding grounds for many diseases. Floods increased in intensity because people started cutting trees, filling up water sources to construct houses, factories, etc. That meant that the rainwater had no outlet to be drained into. The question is, you also told us that workers move from rural areas to the cities. What are the problems that this migration brings for workers? She moved from Manigachi to Tarbanga, which is a semi-rural area. Most workers move from rural to urban areas and they find it difficult to settle down because of lack of proper housing, land scarcity, unaffordable prices in the city makes it difficult for them to cope. Do you think your life would have been better had you received the opportunities you have now back in Manigachi? Yes, without displacement, it would have been much better for her if she could access these opportunities from her own village. The opportunities in her home village were limited by environmental degradation and lack of access to government services as her village is a remote in a remote area. There should be some form of accountability both by the government and the factory owners on how they utilize the land in rural areas and for what purpose. This is what was shared by Janki on behalf of I have shared. So if anybody has anything to clarify, I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Lima. Indeed, natural disasters such as floods are nothing but natural, and how these serious consequences pose in the lives of domestic workers when have to migrate to the city and living in these conditions where there is no decent work and there are no rights. Perhaps now we can see if our sister Aisata has been able to manage the audio. Aisata? Hi, Aisata, can you hear me? If you can hear me, we don't know if you're frozen. Okay, I see you moving. Go ahead, Sister Aisata. Your microphone is muted. You need to unmute your microphone and the floor is yours. There we go.
Ok, c'est bon?
C'est bon.
Ok. Donc, c'était le 6 septembre
I actually don't have a sound. I can't enable my sound. I'm sorry. Here we see images of the floods that we experienced.
Donc, ça avait commencé depuis le désarroi de la dépendance totale. Nous devons sauver nos vies. Et nous...
Perdón, no recibo un sonido que me permita interpretar.
We can't hear Aisata. Right now we can't hear her sound.
No recibo sonido, perdón.
I apologize, but I don't receive any audio.
Okay, thank you.
Pour que nous retrouvions refuge là où nous vivons, c'est vraiment important.
Okay, it seems that Aysata still has some problems with the audio. Our interpreters are unable to receive sound in order to do the interpretation. Let's try one more time, and if it's not working, then we will move to the next speaker until we keep trying with Aysata. Aysata, can we try one more time? See if the interpreters can hear you. Okay, I think because time is always an issue in these type of events, we're going to move on to the next speaker. And in the meantime, Aysata, we are going to try to assist you with sound behind the scenes. But for now, I think we have to move to the next speaker, who is Miriam. Miriam is a domestic worker from the Philippines who have been working in Lebanon for 27 years. Along with other domestic workers, she found the Alliance of Migrant Domestic Workers in Lebanon, a multinational informal organization that works on supporting and organizing migrant domestic workers. She has been an activist for the past 9 years. Miriam, welcome.
Hello. Thanks, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon from Lebanon and good morning from around the world. Oh, I like the cats. So I will be speaking about the waste garbage in Lebanon. In year 2015, there was a series of protests in response to the government's failure to find solutions to a waste crisis caused by the closure of the Beirut waste dump in Naami, south of Beirut in July 2015. There was no alternative waste disposal planned and collected for weeks. In the sweltering heat in the streets of the capital of Beirut that affects migrant domestic workers, both live-ins and live-outs. For the live-ins, they are in charge of taking out the garbage and finding it where to throw. For the live-outs, because of this, there's a lot of migrant domestic workers got sick, because especially those who are suffering from asthma and have heart problem, because the issues was they live next to the dumping area. And I am the example of one of this, because I live next to the dumping area. There's a lot are full of rats and cockroach. And this time, it's another layer of this issue is the water shortage in the country. No water to take shower and clean the house. Because of this negative effect, migrant domestic workers participate in the protests with the local NGOs. And also I myself, I participate with other migrant domestic workers. We participated in the protest because where I live is next to the dumping area, site of Karantina in the near area of Beirut. For the meantime, the problem was solved, but now it's emerging again. Now we're worried because maybe that it will be worse because of the challenge. For the past 2 years, migrant domestic workers are facing a lot of problems in this country, especially for the economic and for the COVID. So this is all the problem here in Lebanon because of the waste garbage, and because there's also there's no alternative and recycling. There's no recycling in this country. Before there is, but now it's only like a couple of months, and none. And from there they stop again. Thank you so much, IDWF.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That's such an impressive and important work that migrant domestic workers are doing and fighting multiple fronts in Lebanon. Thank you. And now we are going to go back to Aysata to see if we have been able to assist her and if she's been able to find out what's happening with the audio. Aysata, if you can hear me, we go back to you. There is Aysata. Aysata, you are muted.
Oui, je suis là. Ça peut aller?
Yes, here I am.
Oh, Aysata, I think your microphone has, there we go. It's unmuted. Go ahead, Aysata. It seems that Aysata is not able to come up with sound. For a moment, we were able to hear you, Aysata. I see your, yes, go ahead. Now it seems that it's working. Let's try one more time.
Ok, donc c'était en 2020, donc nous avons été frappés par l'inondation. Donc nous étions plus de 1000 à séjourner
We've
dans
had a flood in 2020. There were about 1,000 people that had to be relocated. I found some domestic workers with whom I started working. And at that time, I developed those activities. We've witnessed very sad situations because we were under very promiscuous circumstances. We've been displaced from our homes. So what really affected domestic work paired with the floods and the houses where we worked, all of these circumstances led to the interruption of our work. Can't hear. I said that.
Aysata.
sans-abri. Donc,
Okay.
était un moment de amener d'autres. Et malheureusement, ça n'a pas été les besoins de la famille. Donc, vous voyez comment nous dans les classes.
Her speech is cut off. We can't really hear her.
Okay, the interpreters are telling us that the sound is chopped, Aysata, and now you are muted. And if you can briefly repeat because the interpreters couldn't hear you. Aysata, your microphone is muted. I don't think that the interpreters are able to hear you. I see you are speaking, but you are muted. Sister Aisata. Okay, it's a pity that we are having problems with the sound from Aisata's end. So to not waste more time, we're going to try to go back to Aisata one more time and see if we are able. If not, I'm afraid we will have to continue to the next section, who is questions and answers. Aisata. Okay. Unfortunately, it seems that it's not working, Aisata. So we will have to move on to the next section because time is running. Now we are going to open the floor for questions and answers, comments to everyone. Abrimos el micrófono para preguntas, comentarios.
Hola.
Sí.
Hola.
Hello, sí.
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Me escucha?
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you.
A ver, yo estoy escuchándoles desde Valencia,
I've
España.
been listening from Valencia, Spain. I'm part of a domestic and care workers union. So I'd like to welcome and thank everyone who participated for the work they've been doing, women within organizations of domestic workers and care workers in Latin America and the world at large. It is, to me, a new perspective when thinking about climate change and how this affects our work. I think it's important to include it in our agenda to continue the work that our comrades have started. And I'd like to add just the perspective from Spain. Sometimes we think that because we are in a developed country, we can exercise freely our human rights, but let's not be mistaken. These human rights of domestic workers have been violated. There is a decree, however, where a domestic worker can work more than 40 hours a week, which can reach 60 or 80 hours a week. We see this as the normal, but we need to have Spain ratifying the C-189 of the ILO because it hasn't been recognized since 2011. And instead, they issued this decree from 2011 where they established these working hours. Most of the domestic workers in Spain are female, and more than 50% of them are migrant workers. But we believe they're more than 50% because we have those that are nationalized, which are already considered from Spain, plus some others that are undocumented and working on their documentations. And that's why we say there's many more than 50% of migrant domestic workers. The law of... Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Entonces, la ley de extranjería permite que una persona...
So the law for foreign citizens allow for someone to be 3 years without the proper documentation. So this means that citizenship at large violate these human and labor rights of domestic workers and care workers, and they are victims of household work without the proper rules and the proper rights because they don't have any documents in place. So thank you for the opportunity and congratulations again for the initiative.
Thank you so much, sister from Spain. Sorry, I can't see your name in my screen. Here I have some questions on the chat box. First is a comment from Petra from Mexico. Thank you, Lilian, for your presentation, which brings back us to the conditions of unprotection when handling chemicals in our work. I see that also Marcela had her hand raised. Marcela, I don't know if you still...
No?
Yes, go ahead, Marcela. Okay, I don't see Marcela's hand anymore. Perhaps we can move on to the next question in the chat box, and we're going to see if Marcela wants to come back. Yes, Marcela,
if I have any questions?
I saw your hand raised.
Marcela bin kayo esta partirinde.
Okay, it seems that it's not a question. So in the chat box, we have a comment, a question from Mako Yoshimura. How is the support of trade union in the countries you work? Perhaps Lilian, Miriam.
Hello.
En el caso de Citradomsa,
in the case of Citradomsa,
okay.
In the case of Citradomsa, Guatemala, we support women from a legal area, a training area. We also support them from a humanitarian area. We've conducted a survey where we've seen that women need medicine. And from this survey, we also reached the conclusion that they need training in safety, security, advocacy, communication. We've also safeguarded them in case of violence when they reach out to the union. So we help them in their human and labor rights. So we support them before the courts with their employers in claims before the public ministry on certain violent circumstances where they've been victims in the houses where they work, particularly where they're underage.
Thank you, Lilian. There is like a second part of the same question that says, are there effective support and or cooperation by international civil society? I guess maybe Miriam or Sister Lima would like to address this question.
Hello again.
Hi. Go ahead.
Yeah, from us here in Lebanon, as a co-founder of the Alliance of Migrant Domestic Workers, we also support our fellow migrant domestic workers in the humanitarian aid, like distributing relief foods, medicines, and diapers and babies' milk for those migrant domestic workers who have children here in Lebanon. And also we, as a migrant domestic here, We also provide attending the workshop and sharing awareness to all migrant domestic workers in all nationalities. So this is the things that we are doing here in Lebanon.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I am looking if Sister Lima.
Yeah. In India too, we support the domestic workers, especially during this COVID period. The migrant workers, interstate migrant workers were much more safer because they were within their families, staying 24 hours. Safer in the means they were safer from the outside, but they were 24 hours, they were overworked, but they didn't need any help. But the other workers, inter-district migrant workers, like Janaki, traveling from rural areas to the urban. So such domestic workers who are the members of NDWF got a lot of humanitarian aid. First, in the first wave, the second wave also, we could manage to support them with dry rations, masks, and medicines. Health camps were conducted, and they were affected by any chronic disease were supported. Around, I think, more than 70,000 domestic workers were supported all over India in 16 states. So this is what we could do. About climate change, the migrant workers are much more affected, interstate migrant workers, because most of them are from the tribal belts, and the tribals are in a way or chased from their villages by these corporate companies, and the government allows it to happen, and the trees are being cut and their livelihood is snatched from them. So for them, we do the placement, but there is a lot of trafficking happening due to climate change, and also due to this corona. A lot of children stopped going to school. Young children are just being trafficked and sent to the cities. So that's very painful to see that.
Indeed. Thank you, Sister Lima. I think we have time for one more question. And it's the question is, how is the support of trade unions to domestic workers when we are talking about all these issues and problems that have been discussed here? Anyone? Miriam, Sister Lima, Lilian? The support of trade unions. Go ahead.
Yeah. From us here in Lebanon, the support that we have is we are very thankful for the IDWF, because they really support us here in Lebanon when it comes to humanitarian aid and from the access to workshops and sharing awareness to all these migrant domestic workers here in Lebanon, especially in the crisis of COVID-19 here in Lebanon. So we are very thankful to IDWF.
Thank you, Miriam. I have some comments here on the chat. Many are giving you thanks, speakers, for such an interesting presentations. Petra is saying that the importance of climate change we can see in the scarcity of water, in the privatization of water, that we see that many corporations want to sell us the water. In the meantime, we are working with lack of water in our jobs, which is the most elemental natural resource for human beings. Yeah, okay. I encourage the speakers to see the congratulations and the thank you notes to all of you for your presentations. Now we are going to move to our next speaker, who is going to give us the perspective coming from a very important social movement that is addressing many of these issues. Our speaker is Marisa Cantarino. She is from the Global Waste Pickers movement, and she will give us an insider look at what is and how is the waste management and the possible and the different possibilities for collaboration between the domestic workers movement and the movement of waste pickers. Marisa, the floor is yours.
Buenos días, muchas gracias.
Good morning. Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to be able to share my work with all these women who have done exceptional work. I now need to tell you a bit about the work of women who are waste pickers. It's very common among women since the care work that we perform, we all perform that work. This task or these tasks are not unpaid. And this is one of the struggles of feminism as a whole, and we all need to fight for that. All women have to strengthen our push, our struggle, our fight. How? With environmentalism, with social environmental issues where we have significant things that we can do. I was listening to our comrades about what they were doing, and I was trying to find linkages to women waste pickers, and we're not very different. Quite the contrary, there are many things that link us together, that bring us together. Many comrades who are now waste pickers, at some point in life, were domestic workers. I like to call them workers, and I emphasize this worker because the same way I like to refer to us as the workers who are waste pickers. I like that word, worker. And workers have still many things to conquer, to achieve. And I would like to go back to Pope Francis's words, who calls our planet our common house. And waste pickers take care of your streets, but domestic workers take care of individual households. And this is where our similarities begin. Women workers provide service to the community. And from my position as a waste picker, even though now I'm an environmental promoter, even though I still feel as a waste picker, because the essence of waste picking is never lost. And I think about the importance that we have and everything we do during a single day of our lives. We wake up, we make breakfast, we take care of our families, we prepare our cart because we need to go out, we take our children to school, and our daily work begins then. Most of our comrades take their children to a double shift school so that they don't have to go pick them up at lunchtime and take them home. And then we go out to walk around the city trying to find recyclables. And then we go back home with our cart full. We empty the cart and we go back out until it's time to pick up our children in school. And then after that, we go back home and work continues there. We need to empty the cart. We need to help our children with their homework. We need to think about food. We need to do our house chores. And at that point, there is no difference between one worker and another kind of worker, because domestic workers need to go back home and need to take care of their chores after a long day of work, which is very tiring. The same holds true for us. And you've probably noticed that I didn't mention a husband because most of our colleagues are heads of households, and so they officiate both as mother and father. But those of us who have a partner have still a lot of work because in many cases work is not shared, and so sometimes work is doubled. As an environmental promoter, after many years of pushing the cart, my body started to feel the work.
Aviso de que me estaba resultando
And my body started to tell me that it was becoming harder and harder to push or to pull from the cart. And the opportunity to be part of the environmental promoters program appeared. This is the first one with a gender perspective.
separación en origen.
And that's how I started to teach about correct separation at the source. I started to talk about the importance of waste picking and the knowledge I gained during my work as a waste picker. I apply that knowledge as a environmental promoter. The difference between being a waste picker and being a promoter is that I have a fixed time for working. I have a health insurance and I have time to go back home and take care of things. My daughter is old and she has her own family, but I have time to take care of my grandchildren. And I have time to use that time that before I had to use in going back out. Now I can study, I can do arts and crafts, I can do things that I like and I can grow. Many of our comrades have been able to continue studying, have been able to finish their studies. And this is so important, not only for us, but also to be able to help the people that surround us and for our work too. And waste pickers who are organized and who work in the cooperative also have this possibility. They have a fixed schedule. They can go back home. We, of course, always have to do our house chores, but we can organize ourselves in a different way. And once again, there's no difference between our jobs. All of us fight for decent work, for having equality of rights, economic rights. And there, at this point, I'd like to mention the work that is being done by our union, which is composed of many branches. I belong to the waste picking branch, but there is another branch that is called social and community work, where many women, many of whom are waste pickers, are many of whom are part of the popular economy. They take charge of the different care tasks which are not paid. And during the pandemic, I was actually listening to the other speakers who mentioned the pandemic, and the truth is that the pandemic has hit us very harshly on our health, on economics, and also it has hit us as women because to be able to go out means that we need to leave our daily things, what we do every day, which is the same over and over again. And so being locked in our house because of the pandemic also affected us. It affected our health, and like our colleagues said, it affected our psychological aspect as well. And this is true. This is the way it is. And these colleagues from the social and community branch were at the forefront during the pandemic, working in the soup kitchens where perhaps without the pandemic, they took care of 50 or 60 families. And during the pandemic, they had up to 200 or 250 families actually. And This meant that our colleagues had a very, very heavy burden, but they were there. They were there preparing the food to provide to people who were in isolation, to be able to, people who would always go pick up their food and were isolated. These colleagues provided the food for them. And so they were there. They were always helping them out every single day. Even without the pandemic, the colleagues take care of our children. They work by preparing food, and also they accompany them with the housework, the school work, and they provide recreation for children while they wait for their parents to come back home. And so those colleagues as well provide support to their neighbors who are victims of violence, and they provide assistance. They try to find solutions to their problems. So our comrades provide significant work that is many times not visible, like domestic work and waste pickers. And this is very important. So UTEP, our union, thinks that this is very necessary, and it's very necessary to support this, because this fight and this recognition of care work done by women this work has to be recognized.
So we thought of a creation of a universal minimum wage that all these women in charge of care work can collect what we call a formal or official salary that goes hand in hand with the tasks that they develop. And in order to wrap up my presentation, let me tell you that as waste speakers and environmental promoters, we have with domestic workers a bond, a linkage through which we can exchange knowledge, separation at source, recycling, and other environmental aspects that they can take to their houses where they themselves work so that they can contribute towards recycling, which is so important. This is part of where we can start fighting different climate change issues. We know that climate change is very strong. It is severe. This is what is causing floods, migration, that, as someone mentioned before, is affecting more than 80% of women. And this is where we become more vulnerable upon this climate change, and we need to unite our strengths and forces so that we can start thinking of an environment with social inclusion. This is very important for women so that we can cohabit within a healthier environment. We do have that potential as women. We can offer and fight a strong fight. And I insist, there is no difference between what we do and what domestic workers do. And that's why we believe it's so important to be connected, related, and work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, compañera Marisa. Thank you so much for showing us the strong similarities of the issues that our movements share, but not only showing us how these issues affect us deeply, but the similarities in the ways that our movements fight back, the similarities that we have on the ways that we envision a political action and how we envision a more just, world, a more just working conditions and environmental conditions for us all. Thank you so much. You showed us that our movements are very similar when you were speaking about how your movement was able to support each other through the pandemic. And to me, it sounded very similar to all the display of actions and shows of solidarity that domestic workers have been also taking on during the pandemic. So with this, we are coming almost to an end to our very inspiring and powerful event today. And for this, I would like to invite our president, Myrtle Whitboyd, to give us a closing remarks and to set the ground for possibilities of bringing together the struggles, of possibilities of collaborations, and how we should keep moving forward on this fight. Myrtle, President Myrtle, the floor is yours.
I'm here. Good day. I think I'm very impressed with most of the speakers. I'm impressed with, that what we know about, everything that we seem to know, what we're talking about, how climate change is affecting our lives. And if we globally round it up, we will see that climate change is actually affecting us. It brings poverty, it brings inequality, it brings health issues, it brings so much. It affects the food in the water. It affects, it affects everything that deals with domestic workers. But however, to bring domestic workers into the discussion around us, we need to look at programs, and we need to develop programs where we actually reach out to domestic workers to empower them to understand. As we look what happened with the COVID-19 now, and we find ourselves lost, we find ourselves in a world of technology. So what we should do now, we should ensure that our leaders can be empowered to understand exactly what is climate change doing to us, exactly what is global warming doing to us. Sometimes we see all these big words and we don't understand that it's actually affecting our life. It's affecting our homes. It's affecting our family. It's affecting our jobs. It's making us poorer. And we don't put a name to it because the names that the outside world is using is so high that sometimes we don't understand. But if we break it down, we will see that climate change is affecting us badly. It's affecting the way we travel to work. It's affecting the way we live. It's affecting the way we live without water, with sanitary, and all these things. So our way forward would be to ensure in all our countries that we develop programs, that we get involved with organizations that specifically dealing with climate change, that we don't stand back, that we as leaders go there, get involved, and actually learn more. So if we learn, if we are empowered, we can come back to the other domestic workers and say, look, this is not normal what is happening. We have to stand up. We have to take back what belongs to us. And this is the way forward for us. And I'm very impressed with all the speakers. It even opened my mind to, there's so much that we don't know. There's so much because we keep on fighting for labor issues. But climate change is a labor issue. And all labor issues that are affecting us. So thank you, Adriana, for the way you conduct this. It's fantastic. Thank you for all the speakers. Now and then the sound was a little bit off, but we managed to get what everybody's saying. Also, thank you to Rola. Rola, I also see Elizabeth was popping up somewhere. And this is what we have to look at. As we go into the new world, let us take domestic workers into all these changes so that we can empower ourselves to live and empower others to understand how our lives are affected by all these changes. Thank you so much. And for all of those that give up their Sunday, enjoy the rest of the morning, the evening, and look forward to see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Myrtle, for your always ever empowering and insightful words. Thank you so much to everyone. Long live to domestic workers, long live to waste speakers, long live to all the social movements that are fighting for justice and equality, especially for women. Thank you so much to all my colleagues and all the speakers. Thank you. I guess nobody wants to leave, as it usually happens in our events. You can say goodbye in the chat. And we thank you all again. And let's keep fighting back, knowing that we are not alone, knowing that we are more, knowing that we are stronger together when we are united. Gracias.